Bitcoin does what it does. Regulated or unregulated, it doesn't change how Bitcoin operates. Political risk goes away, career risk goes away, then all of a sudden, the Overton window in general has completely shifted in our favor. And we can now start to surface all of these arguments and all these conversations about, well, how healthy to the economy and society is the idea of central banking?
I think it's a matter of perceived difficulty versus perceived reward. It's how much people think it's going to be difficult versus what they think they are getting out of it. What do you mean, no? Why are you declining my transaction? They said, normal people don't spend that much on a computer. Businesses spend that on computers, but normal people don't. It's my money, I want to spend it. No, you can't. So I had this ridiculous argument with them for about 3 weeks before finally they let me spend my money and buy that computer.
I think building out those pockets of usage, creating more and more people who are everyday users of Bitcoin is the way that it will happen. Legacy industry point of view, this also creates opportunities.
My name's, for those of you that don't know me, my name's David Parkinson. I'm the founder and CEO of Musqet. We're a Bitcoin payments business, and we provide full stack payment services. So that's Visa, MasterCard, Amex, Bitcoin over Lightning with Apple Pay, Google Pay as standard in our physical terminals. We have an online gateway as well, and a deep capability set across EPOS so that we can really compete with the likes of Square and other full stack merchant capabilities so that businesses can accept Bitcoin in the same way that they accept cards, gift vouchers, or any other membership or loyalty reward points. So it's a frictionless way to accept Bitcoin. We do that because we're, as we were talking before we set up and started the podcast, I would consider us as medium of exchange maxis. Bitcoin is a broad church, and I'm firmly of the belief that it can be both things at the same time. It can be a store of value, and it can be a medium of exchange. And I fully appreciate that there's lots of arguments as to why you might not spend your Bitcoin right now when it's still aggressively appreciating. But we are of the view that there's no time to waste. We need to get that capability set out there. In terms of my background, I spent quite a few years in management consulting industry. So that was across Ernst & Young, PwC. I started out my career in London, in the city, focusing on telecommunications and low latency connectivity between banks and exchanges. Predominantly on the sales and project management side there, but that was a fascinating insight to how all the various infrastructure and components of trading work. And before I launched Musqet, I also spent some time in the internet TV world, so launching internet TV businesses across Europe. So on behalf of Sky, Now TV, across Austria, Germany, that kind of thing. So quite a broad background, and I spent 10 years focusing on Bitcoin as a parallel to that. And it gradually chipped away and ate into my brain as these things do, and I just couldn't spend a second more doing anything else other than focusing on Bitcoin. And myself and the core founding team decided that actually we needed to make sure that Bitcoin is a medium of exchange, and we thought we had some skill sets and products that needed to be built and taken to market. So here we are.
That's awesome. Maybe we can get started with Adrian quickly. Hi, Adrian. I've never met you before, but maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit and tell. David told me you aren't yet fully into Bitcoin, or not at all. This was not fully clear. Maybe you can kind of like introduce yourself a little bit, and then also how you think about Bitcoin currently.
Yeah. Hi, Robin. So my name's Adrian, and my background is years and years and years of innovation in financial services and payments, going all the way back to the early days of the smart card industry and trying to combat fraud with chip and PIN, and various roles in various financial institutions, regulated businesses, including being the first independent managing director of Faster Payments here in the UK, which was overseen by the Bank of England, which is the bank's version of instant settlement and clearing, so giving someone their money immediately. And And I've built payments businesses, especially in the merchant acquiring space, and helped all sorts of organizations all around the world build those businesses and find their way through. I love innovation. I've always been interested in Bitcoin. And then I had the great fortune to meet David, and I think it was nearly 2 years ago. And he described something to me which I thought was just fascinating. How could you turn Bitcoin into an everyday currency by putting it inside today's payments infrastructure, getting everyone used to it, happy with it, and then let it become the dominant global currency? And I thought that was just such a fascinating thing. And at that point in time, I guess my view of Bitcoin was clever idea, really clever. I could see the potential, but I couldn't see how it could move from interesting asset class to something that was genuinely an everyday global currency. And meeting David opened my eyes to that possibility. And I think what we're doing here is about delivering the future of Bitcoin. It's about delivering a truly free global currency that isn't hampered by the machinations of governments and bad actors, but is something that will do the world good. But at the same time, we're also improving the payments industry, which is, most merchants will describe their relationship with a merchant acquirer as death and taxes. You have to have a payment terminal. You can't not take cards. I know one retailer who works local to me who only takes cash, and he probably loses 30% of his walk-in customers for that reason. I don't know why, but that's his decision. So for me, I now see Bitcoin as the future of retail payments. It may take a while, but you have to start with a solid mission and a business that can attract investment and grow. And that's what David has built. And I'm very happy to be helping him.
That's awesome. And it's also, I see that a lot actually with, in Austria, where there are some small stores, especially like those small pizza stores, they only have cash always. And there are some also, especially coffee shops. If you're in Vienna and you're a coffee shop, the chances that they are only accepting only accepting cash is very high. There's this another thing where they sometimes start accepting cards at like 10 euros or like above 5 years or above 15 years, some magical line there. And so for me as a merchant, it's like, why wouldn't you accept Bitcoin? The fees are usually lower than cards. I'm not an expert on that, but like I always see those things and then I was like, oh, they should be lower. So yeah, Bitcoin as a media exchange is something, it's funny enough, not as much as discussed even in the Bitcoin community. We focus on the store of value and number crop technology. But medium of exchange, I'm super bullish on that. Maybe let's get Ben also in there. As you have been introduced to the audience, but maybe who are you, and especially why are you excited about Bitcoin as a medium of exchange?
Yep, absolutely. So I'm Ben. I'm the CTO at Musqet. I joined a couple of years ago when David invited me to join. But interestingly, anyone who remembers me from being on your show last time, I've been living on Bitcoin since 2017. I don't hold fiat. So for me, it's natural that Bitcoin must be a medium of exchange. I mean, if I hold Bitcoin and I can't use it as a medium of exchange, then the only thing I can do with it is swap it back for fiat and then spend that fiat, which is annoying. It's a difficult process. So the more Bitcoin gets used as a medium of exchange, the easier my life gets. So it's kind of a straightforward thing for me that Musqet is the kind of company that I want to be working with and I want to spend my efforts on. But beyond that, I also believe Bitcoin needs it to succeed. Money has to be a medium of exchange in order to be all of the other things that money is. Money can't be a store of value without also potentially being a medium of exchange, because what value are you storing if you're never exchanging it? So to me, that's kind of the most important thing. My background, just for anyone who isn't aware of it, I spent most of my career as a software developer, moved into more senior roles doing management, software architecture, that kind of thing. And I've been working in the Bitcoin space exclusively since 2018. Worked for a couple of mining companies, worked for Lightning Labs for a while, worked for Swan for a while, ran my own consulting company. So I'm fairly experienced in the Bitcoin space, as well as some general software development.
Awesome. Mining, exchange, and payment service providers. Like you got the whole package.
Exactly.
Maybe with David, I'm often wondered about like where we are currently in this payment phase of Bitcoin, because it is like there is a few people that really use Bitcoin as payments. And I think they are, like Ben, they are like me. I use Bitcoin almost weekly now as a payment, like directly in Bitcoin, where I earn Bitcoin, but also spend it, pay my freelancers with them and stuff like that. Sometimes I wonder if like we do need it, but maybe we are just like out the edge of pushing it very early on, where we like, maybe we're just like very early in this media of exchange things where we need to wait like 3, 4, 5, 6 more years to like actually have media of exchange, adoptions, or more people have just Bitcoin as like a store of value. And then like they will naturally start like exchanging it also more. Where do you think we are in this like phase of Bitcoin as a media of exchange?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question. And depending on who you talk to, you get a different answer. I was at an event just last week where someone on stage argued that they just don't see it as a medium of exchange at all. I tried not to throw a chair at them from the audience, but I think you have to understand what Bitcoin is, and I think Ben nailed the question on the head. It's the best form of money that we've ever had, and we ever will have, most likely. Therefore, why would you not want to at some point then start to spend it? So I think it's still early, very, very early, on the basis that Bitcoin is still going through its monetary premium phase. It's until Bitcoin is trading at, north of $10 million. It's not necessarily, in my view, going to arrive at that hyper Bitcoinized world. But I don't think we can wait until then for it to be used. And I think there's also significant advantages for those individuals and businesses who accept it. So, we've done this now rather than do it in 10 years because we think we can shape the future of how merchants accept Bitcoin. We think we can shape how Bitcoin fits into the world of global commerce. And actually, we think we can do it by doing the right thing. And as far as possible for us, that means self-custodial infrastructure, again, which is hard. We're not choosing easy paths here. We're choosing very difficult journeys, but we think they matter. We think they really matter, both at the societal level, the monetary level, the individual, and the business level. So, I think it's very early. We are laying that infrastructure, or rather, the way that we see it is we're building the endpoints. We're building all of those destinations out. Now, if someone wants to build the rails and the journey and the people go to those venues and destinations to actually spend their Bitcoin, fantastic. But the way that we've done it, again, bringing up one of the points that Adrian raised, I think that the whole proposition appealed to Adrian is this is something that isn't subject to the growth or adoption of Bitcoin. We can take our time. We are happy to, if this takes 2 years, amazing. If it takes 20 years, it's irrelevant to us. We will continue to grow our customer base, innovate in the Bitcoin and Lightning space, and build out as many products and capabilities that make it as easy and frictionless as possible for merchants to accept Bitcoin. And the reason that we've done it this way is that if you just focus on Bitcoin, if we were only a Bitcoin payments business, the revenues just aren't there. As you said, the volume. So, you end up having to charge merchants about 5% per transaction to get anywhere near break even, or even, there are models out there. I've seen people charging a monthly fee for the ability to accept Bitcoin in your business. So if you're paying, $50 or so a month to accept Bitcoin, well, yes, you might get a very good technical service, but you're going to be overpaying the per transaction rate, for a long time. So, what we've decided to do is build out that entire infrastructure and accept the fact and the reality that the world still operates in the current system. It still uses Visa, MasterCard, and Amex, and it will do for a long time. But there is an alternative that we've slipped in there that, to use the Hayek term, is the sly roundabout way. And for us, making it frictionless and easy for individuals to pay in Bitcoin, for businesses to receive and store it, well then, as I say, we can create a profitable growth model, ideally sweep up millions of merchants globally, and then as and when, either if we need it to operate as freedom money, it's there. If we don't need it to operate as freedom money because governments are behaving themselves and that they're not operating in more and more increasingly totalitarian ways, which they're currently not doing a very good job of, they're sort of going down that curve a lot more aggressively and a lot faster than I'd have expected. So even if we don't need the freedom money side of it, actually we can just wait until Bitcoin has arrived at a value of, let's say, north of 10 trillion or something like that. And people are more inclined to use it as a medium of exchange. But, right now I think there are areas in the world and individuals and societies that actually value Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, unstoppable, borderless, instant currency. And they do use it. It's just that I guess we in Western Europe and North America don't necessarily have the same current need for it. But, my final point there is I don't think at the same time we've got, I don't think we can wait before we push this out and make it, and embed it in everyone's sort of payment stack.
I thought a lot about what it really takes for Bitcoin to be established as an option for payments globally. And there's a lot of interesting things we can look at there. I think Bram Constant brought that up, where someone studied hundreds of revolutions and conflicts around the world in history, and they came up with the number 3.5%. If 3.5% and grow into a revolution and they're strong enough, it usually ends up being a successful one. And when I thought about it, is like, what is an interesting comparison to that? And might not be popular in Bitcoin communities, but if you think about vegetarian options, in Austria, there's a lot of restaurants that still have like no vegetarian options, but they get more and more. And I kind of saw that in the last 10 years. And I bring that example up because if a restaurant has like traditional dishes and has no vegetarian option, if we have now 10% vegetarians that are intolerant about eating meat, and they're saying, I only eat vegetarian things. They come in the restaurant, like they are searching for vegetarian dish, and they ask maybe the waiters are like, "Oh, do we have something vegetarian?" And they say like, "No." And if this happens enough, and we can debate on like where this number is, at some point the owner will say, hey, I don't like vegetarian things, but we're losing a lot of revenue and a lot of customers because of that. Let's just introduce 1-2 vegetarian dishes so they can eat something. And the same thing, I think, might apply to Bitcoin, where when more and more people just like, hey, can I pay with Bitcoin here? Can I pay something with Bitcoin here? And they're like, no. And you're like, okay, I'll go to the next store because I want to pay with Bitcoin. And so I don't know where this number is of like this intolerant minority of small group of people that say like, I want that option. Like, I don't care if you also accept fiat or also accept like blueberries. Like, I don't care. I want to pay with Bitcoin. And I thought about like, that's an interesting thing, that we don't need like 50% of people wanting to pay with Bitcoin. We might just need like 5% that are really loud and saying like, I want to pay with Bitcoin and I don't care like that.
Yeah, I think there's two sides to that coin. I think one, as I sort of alluded to, the government overreach side, we've seen in China the risk of social credit scores and people being deplatformed and debanked. And that's very prevalent. The technology exists. There is a real push for central bank digital currencies. We've just seen in the UK this week this the notion and the idea that the government wants to mandate digital IDs, and they even said on the media on the TV this morning that I think the words they used were, if you don't take a digital ID, then you're going to struggle to get a job. So, this idea of mandating digital presence, that there's a very fine line between having a digital ID card, something that is then also easily linked to your bank account, and then being deplatformed. So I think, it's an increasing degree of risk in society, not just here, but also in all over the world, that people are going to face challenges with money. They're not going to be able to buy what they want in whatever quantity they want. Bitcoin solves that. Being able to spend self-custodial Bitcoin in any merchant is a valuable, is I hope it isn't something that people need, because that means we've sort of entered dark times. But it is one of the key features of Bitcoin. Unstoppable money is something that I think is essential. So that's the one side of it. The other side, I'd spin that one on its head in terms of what we see right now. We do have people going out and proactively saying, can we pay in Bitcoin? When we talk to our merchants, they are very intrigued by it. It's a really nice sales angle for us, because we're not just having a conversation about rates and how low the processing fee could get to. They're really interested in what Bitcoin is, how it works, how it could help them as a business. But some of our anecdotal data tells us that there are people, and specifically Bitcoiners, who are so motivated to support Bitcoin and see it work and grow and be used every day, that they switch their purchasing decisions to those venues. So as you said, it's not necessarily a negative. It's almost more of a positive from a merchant perspective, because they can differentiate from their customers. They can put their hand up to the world and say, we accept Bitcoin. And if they're a physical store, I've heard stories of people, coming from America, landing at London Heathrow, and then going to a random pub in the middle of nowhere that they otherwise wouldn't have gone to, for dinner and drinks, within 2 hours of landing, because they accept Bitcoin, and then, carrying on with the rest of their trip and their visit. So little things like that make a difference. And the same, it's even more valuable for online merchants. We're focusing a lot on e-commerce merchants at the moment, and Bitcoiners are globally distributed. So if you have your favorite brand, you can easily now switch to that business that accepts Bitcoin. And also what we find, I think, which is quite an interesting nuance, is not all Bitcoiners do want to spend their Bitcoin. They want to send their custom to that venue. So they'll go and spend fiat currency with it, and they'll happily use their card or cash, but they won't always spend Bitcoin. But they're happy to be giving their custom and their trade to that merchant.
Is there danger in that? And maybe Ben is actually good for that, because I see more and more talks of okay, Bitcoin is the store of value. It's focus on just keep it. There's this big meme out there that I disagree with very strongly. Never sell your Bitcoin. Maybe we have to expand on it. Never sell, but spend it. Your Bitcoin. Is there a danger that Bitcoin slips into the same category as gold, just stays digital gold and kind of becomes bank coin over time?
So is there a danger? I think technically yes, but practically no. I think there are enough people using Bitcoin already that it's not going to fall into that. But, absolutely, I could imagine a scenario where everybody just says, okay, I'm not going to spend Bitcoin. I'm only going to hold it as, this speculative thing. I want to have more fiat, so I'm just going to hold Bitcoin. And then at some point in the future, I'll exchange that Bitcoin for fiat and I'll be rich and I'll buy myself a, Lamborghini or whatever the current meme happens to be. But in reality, I don't think that's actually going to happen, because what we're actually seeing more and more is that the people who hold Bitcoin for a long time, they start to say, okay, I've got all of this Bitcoin. I've got, a decent amount of money, and, I'm starting to see that Bitcoin is money. It's not just something I can exchange for money. It really is money itself. So what can I do with it? And those are the people who are then going out and actually looking for merchants where they can spend their Bitcoin. And, they're the ones who are actually making those decisions, like David said, the ones who land at Heathrow Airport and then drive a couple of hours to go to a particular pub just because that pub accepts Bitcoin. So, yeah, I really don't think we have that risk anymore. Once upon a time, we possibly did. If you go back a few years, when Bitcoin was much smaller, we kind of would have said at the time, maybe there's two directions it can go. It goes the medium of exchange route, or it goes only the store of value route, and then we've got problems. I think I was actually a little bit worried about that when it started going the store of value route, but I think it's now grown to the point, even as a medium of exchange, that it's not an issue anymore. If you look at something like BTC Map, who are good friends of ours, we not officially affiliated with them here, but very good friends of ours, btcmap.org. If you look around, especially Europe, the number of places you can now just go in somewhere and spend Bitcoin, whether that's through some third-party service or whether it's directly, there's enough of them now that Bitcoin is, I think, already accepted as a medium of exchange. It's just perhaps not as globally distributed yet as it could be. You zoom in on some US cities, you'll find nothing at all. Zoom in on most European cities, you'll find quite a few places. So the narrative tends to be different depending on where in the world you are. And probably there's a few reasons for that. Things like tax laws can come into it. And I think that's probably another discussion. But I do see that medium of exchange is increasing. It's just perhaps not increasing at the same rate everywhere.
I finally and officially mine Bitcoin. This is not just something to stack more Satoshis, but it's most importantly also to support the network. Individual miners are the ones that keep the Bitcoin network decentralized. And by the way, you get KYC-free Bitcoin. That's why I use simplemining. I get an actual proper Bitcoin miner. They set it up for me. They repair it if it breaks down. And most importantly, they let me choose the pool and even connect my own full node. I'm completely sovereign and I'm completely in control, and I can sign up with Ocean, no account needed. I just give them a Bitcoin address and then there's mining going on. No KYC, nothing. So if you're ready to mine Bitcoin, go to simplemining.io, tell them you come from Robin, and let's mine Bitcoin together. I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called Microseed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today. And you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. Again, that's microseed.io to get your last backup tool you ever need. The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They are also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. It's like, I mean, it's in general, like Bitcoin adoption is very different depending on where you are in the world. It's growth in America different than in Europe, in Europe different than in North Korea, and so on. So like we have differences. I mean, we had that with every innovation with electricity. There are a lot of places in the world that don't have electricity. If you have no electricity in Vienna for like a day, everyone is panicking. So I guess innovation moves at different speeds at different places. I'm really interested because with Adrian we have kind of the view also from the traditional payment processing, if I understood it correct, also in there. How do you think Bitcoin will actually be adopted in the long run for like medium of exchange?
I think, like all innovations, it will start in niches. It will start in pockets where its utility is greater than the existing card schemes can deliver. So there'll be some advantage, and we're already seeing some of this. For example, in international cross-border payments, where merchants experience long delays, high fees, and uncertainty of what they're actually going to get. So I think we start with pockets where the uptake is strong, and eventually these pockets start joining together. And the other thing we're going to see, and it's something we're stimulating, is to feed the other side of the equation. How do we put Bitcoin into the hands of people who aren't Bitcoiners? And, you know, the Bitcoin community one day is going to have to accept that for Bitcoin to achieve its true potential, you don't have to love it or be a fan. It's just everything to everyone. And it becomes part of the global wallpaper of our lives. It's just there for us. To make that happen, you have to put it into the hands of people who are not passionate about it, don't have any other concern, that every time they want to use it, it works. That's why people love the card industry. We tap, we walk away, we get stuff, it's great, it works. So those pockets need to start being reinforced by people who are holding Bitcoin. And there are several ways we see of doing that. One is to make it available as a payroll alternative, and David can talk to you about the work we're doing in that space. The other is to make it a universal reward currency. At the moment, so many retailers are handing out pathetic points that, you know, they go on their balance sheet, they can't be spent, they accumulate. You know, I've got 700,000 Avios points, and I don't seem to be able to ever spend enough of them to get rid of them. But nor do I ever get anything I think is particularly valuable. The last thing I want is another flight. I've spent too many years of my life on an aircraft. The potential for Bitcoin in that space, and I know people are already exploiting this, I think is very strong. And when I speak to my daughter, who at the time I asked her was 17, I said, what would you prefer? Would you like points from, say, H&M or Primark, or would you like sats? And sats, yes, please. Real value that I can spend and use and maybe keep. So I think building out those pockets of usage, creating more and more people who are everyday users of Bitcoin is the way that it will happen. And from the legacy industry point of view, this also creates opportunities. You know, we are today as a company generating revenues for Visa and MasterCard, albeit servicing their products within our customers. But those same revenue opportunities or similar revenue opportunities could exist for them in the future. Our hope, though, is that we're just going to outpace anything that they can deliver and become that global acceptance brand for Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's interesting when I think about Visa and MasterCard, because like they could just do the same thing and just accept Bitcoin and be a massive driver for that. I mean, there are, I think, some cards that do something with Visa, MasterCard, and Bitcoin. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing, but I for sure see nothing big of them accepting Bitcoin.
It isn't in their interest to do so. It is in their interest to protect the infrastructure they've invested in. And that's a global infrastructure of a ledger-based payment service that clears and settles, you know, if you're lucky, every 12 hours. For them to move to a world where they took full advantage of Bitcoin would, I think, be self-destructive. They would destroy their legacy investments' value. They will over time, because they're not stupid. They're clever people. They know what they're doing. But what we need to do is build the payment scheme that uses Bitcoin that we want, and not just a legacy payment scheme with Bitcoin bolted on the side. And I mean that what we have to do as we build that payment scheme is bring Bitcoin values to it, cultural values. And that's the thing I think, as an outsider from the Bitcoin world, working with guys like David and Ben, who I think I can safely say are fully maxed out, and I'm not allowed to ever question Bitcoin, and I've stopped doing it. But there is a culture in the Bitcoin community of wanting the world to be a better place, of wanting people to have the opportunity to be free and to live their lives, but to do good. And that's the culture I love, and that's what I want to see at the heart of what Musqet are building for Bitcoin acceptance. Because if we can deliver that culture, if we can make that real in the real world for merchants, they'll want Bitcoin to be successful. And so will their customers, and then we'll have done our job properly.
I'm always fascinated by the game theory aspect of it. As you said, like it just kind of started randomly, not randomly, but like it started, and it from the beginning, at least for me, it was never sure that it really will succeed. And then at some point, it was more and more sure. It was more and more sure. And with every kind of obstacle we overcame, where all of a sudden, like bigger investors were interested in it. All of a sudden, like the first publicly traded company were interested. Now, all of a sudden, like even like BlackRock is interested in it. So the argument of like, oh, it's a scam or like it's something crazy, it gets harder and harder to do that, even though I still hear it. But then it's like the game theory works so nicely that even the people that really don't want it are incentivized to adopt it. I mean, Visa and MasterCard might not be incentivized it, but they see also that it's growing and growing, and at some point you're like, hey, like our thing kind of gets irrelevant. We might should get something in that new thing, otherwise we probably will be relevant also at some point if this whole fiat thing kind of goes to bust. So I'm fascinated with the game theory behind Bitcoin.
Yeah, and we've seen this before in global innovation. It's innovation is fascinating, the way that things get taken up and adopted. And there are plenty of things that fail because they're often pushed for the wrong motives and the wrong reasons. It seems to me that fundamentally, Bitcoin has some characteristics that make it inevitable. As you know, your figure earlier of about 3.5%, I think it's about right. It seems to be the trigger point for all sorts of shifts in human society, and whether one likes it or not, and I don't, you don't have to, as I've said, you don't have to be a fan of the underlying ideas. There is something inevitable about it. It will find its place in the world, and eventually I think it will come to dominate, because it has attributes that other forms of payment don't have, and they would be very hard to bolt them onto the existing legacy systems.
I love that. Yeah, David, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think we're seeing a real shift now. Over the last 10 years, the world has changed, and I guess the approach and attitude towards Bitcoin has changed. And I would say, that people by their very nature, and people in the broadest sense of the term, are tribal, and it takes someone quite unique to stand out from the crowd and say no, or I believe in something different. And I think Bitcoiners as a group actually, typically tend to represent they're that one individual in a friendship group or at their business and place of work, as someone saying, look, I believe in something different, and this is why I believe in it. But up until recently, they've been very much pariahs and just kept on the edge. But I think what we've seen over the last couple of years is, as Adrian said, Bitcoin is inevitable. You cannot stop it. You cannot stop the march and the inevitability of acceptance, and not just at the individual level, but at the business level and at the government level. So as that starts to happen, then it becomes actually lots of people saying or casting aspersions on Bitcoin and suggesting that it's a bad idea to be associated with it. That risk falls away. I put it in two categories: political risk and career risk. And I think the first of those, we've actually seen political risk has started to fall away, because regulators have been forced to adopt, because of the ground up movement, regulators have been forced to adopt and allocate some form of regulatory framework, whether they like it or not. So they started to do that. Again, Bitcoin does what it does, regulated or unregulated. It doesn't change how Bitcoin operates. So that's one step. Once you've got political risk addressed, and actually, you think, whatever you think of the US government and the Trump administration, they have brought a degree or removed a degree of political risk. It's okay to talk about Bitcoin in the open now on both sides of the political aisle. But that then also comes with the career risk. If you can see political risk starting to go away, we've now then seen the financial institutions start to talk about it, and rather than dismiss it, they've actually started to embrace it and built financial products. Remember how difficult it was to get an ETF approved, just 5 or 6 years ago. I think I was maybe 100x long in BitMEX on the day that the Winklevoss twins first ETF was rejected, and that position was about £20 worth of Bitcoin, but that was liquidated within seconds. But that risk has gone away now, and we're seeing all kinds of institutional adoption, on-ramps and products spinning up left, right, and center for this new asset class. So I think political risk goes away, career risk goes away, then all of a sudden, the Overton window in general has completely shifted in our favor. And we can now start to surface all of these arguments and all these conversations about, well, how healthy to the economy and society is the idea of central banking, and actually, should we own our own money, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, the landscape has shifted enormously in the last 10 years. And what lies ahead of us, I think, is a real rapid rate of adoption, both at the store of value level, because all of these things for the first time are now out of the way. And at the individual level, we can actually now start to buy things, sell things, and really integrate Bitcoin into our everyday lives. And the only sad thing, I'll finish on this bit, the only sad side of that is, as Adrian said, it then at some point stops becoming innovative. It's just a part of our life. In the same way that in the late 80s to early 90s, someone could have easily built a career out of becoming the computer guy, or the e-commerce sort of person in their business. Well, all of a sudden, every business is going to need a Bitcoin strategy, and every business it's just going to be, instead of having a chief Bitcoin officer, well, one day it's just going to be part of a treasurer's job. It's just another product set, and it then gets, instead of being a centralized role, it just gets cascaded. So the treasurer is doing some, the guy who looks after payments is doing some, whoever's looking after marketing is then telling their team, oh, make sure that we advertise that we accept Bitcoin. So there's an amazing, exciting period ahead of us. The sad side of that is eventually it goes away and it's just part of our daily lives. I mean, at that point we've won, which is great, and Bitcoin is everywhere. But bittersweet.
I've said that multiple times, and that's why my podcast never got a Bitcoin, it got a Bitcoin name, and then I changed it after 3-4 episodes into just my own name, because I am well aware, and I think so, that within my lifetime, I'm 27 now, Bitcoin will become very boring. The same way as who wants to talk about the TCP/IP protocol these days? Nobody. I mean, not nobody, but a very, very small set of people. And the same thing will probably also happen with Bitcoin, where yeah, of course, I pay with Bitcoin, I have Bitcoin, who cares? And I actually think that most people, and I'm curious what you guys think on that most people will never think they even have Bitcoin. It's just something that a protocol that works in the background, and they have it somewhere, maybe on a layer 2, maybe on chain, but it's the Bitcoin name kind of vanishes. Maybe Satoshi's is actually the main branding name that will go on in the future. I'm not fully sure on that. I also ask myself a lot of how big self-custody will be in the Bitcoin future, because even now we're so early. Even now, most people don't self-custody. I'm why, like how, like at this point, it's so easy. There's so many services, so many products, and so many things. You can do it very easily on there. And I got this one quote one time where someone told me, when email came out, we thought everyone will run their own email servers. Now everyone is in Gmail, kind of a thing. So I hope we don't end up there. But yeah, maybe an interesting point for Ben to pick up of like, how do you see kind of like Bitcoin progressing into the future where is self-custody a thing?
So I think it's a matter of perceived difficulty versus perceived reward. And I use the word perceived in there quite carefully because it's not just difficulty versus reward. It's how much people think it's going to be difficult versus what they think they are getting out of it. I think for a lot of people in stable Western economies, the perceived difficulty of getting some Bitcoin, self-custodying it in a proper way using something like a hardware wallet, the difficulty seems very high. The reward to most people in those economies seems relatively low because, I can have a bank account, which does basically the same thing and is far easier. That equation, however, looks very different to somebody who has seen hyperinflation. The equation looks very different to somebody who has seen their money be frozen by a bank when they tried to do something that the bank didn't like. I actually have a personal story there. In 2017, I tried to buy a new computer. It's actually that one that's sitting behind me right now. That's a 2017 iMac Pro. When it was brand new, it cost around, I think, 12,000 euro. So, it was a very expensive piece of equipment. And when I went to buy it, the bank said no. And I said, what do you mean no? Why are you declining my transaction? They said, well, normal people don't spend that much on a computer. Businesses spend that on computers, but normal people don't. It's my money. I want to spend it. No, you can't. So I had this ridiculous argument with them for about 3 weeks before finally they let me spend my money and buy that computer. But, that's the kind of thing, for me, that was just an annoying inconvenience. But for somebody in a different location, dealing with different kinds of things, that could be the ability to buy food for their family when the government is concerned that they're buying weapons. It could be actually somebody buying weapons as a resistance against an authoritarian regime. It could be any number of things. So for those people, the equation of perceived risk versus perceived reward is very different. And those people are the people who are going to do so earlier. So I do see a future where self-custody is everywhere, because I also see that the world is getting more and more towards the kinds of things that are going to make people want to self-custody. It's going to force people into making this equation for themselves and saying, I have to self-custody. What that looks like is going to be interesting, though, because I think we all know from a technical standpoint, you cannot get 8 billion people on Earth to get even one UTXO right now easily. So self-custodying onto Bitcoin for 8 billion people has to look different than it does today. And exactly what that's going to look like, I think, is going to be an interesting question for technical people to be figuring out over time. And I also think there are different levels of self-custody. So, is it still self-custody if there's, let's say, a city-wide implementation of Arc, and you've got 1 million people or 2 million people all using virtual transaction outputs within that city, and I own one of those virtual transaction outputs, but I never actually own a real on-chain UTXO, but I potentially could own a real on-chain UTXO, because that's the nature of how Arc works. So those kinds of things become interesting questions around self-custody. Is that self-custody, or is that a 1 million person trusted organization? I think that's kind of one of those philosophical questions, because in a way, the entire Bitcoin network is exactly that. If everybody in Bitcoin decided to collude against you, then you can't spend your money. But we know that that's such a ridiculous concept that it's not going to happen. And that's why we consider it to be self-custody. If every other node on the network rejected your transactions, you can't make transactions. that it's not going to happen. So in the same kind of way, I think some of these models where you could have virtual transaction outputs on something like Arc on a huge scale are functionally equivalent to self-custody because there's millions of participants involved that would all need to conspire against you, and it becomes kind of ridiculous that would happen. So I do think people will self-custody. It's just a question of how, and how is that going to be different to how it looks today. Overall, that risk-reward thing, by the way, I think also applies very much to what we are doing at Musqet. Sorry, not risk-reward, risk difficulty. So what is the difficulty of accepting Bitcoin payments as a merchant versus what is the benefit that I'm getting out of accepting Bitcoin payments as a merchant? The difficulty can include not only things like technical difficulty, but also things like cost. So, as David was saying earlier, there are some people out there, or some companies out there, who will charge you a monthly fee to accept Bitcoin. And that's part of the difficulty side of that equation. I don't want to have to spend $50 a month. I don't want to have this really difficult way to accept Bitcoin. I want it to be easy, or at least I want the ease of it to be a higher value than the difficulty of doing so. It has to be a benefit to me for me to make that decision. So, that's very much what we're doing at Musqet, is making it easier for people to accept Bitcoin in a self-custodial way, so that we're changing that equation for them.
How's it actually looking like currently? Because when I tell people I use Bitcoin almost on a weekly basis, they're like, "Oh, like you use Lightning, right?" And I'm like, "No, actually, I'm doing everything on chain because the fees are ridiculously low. Like, why would I go on Lightning if I pay like 70 cents on Bitcoin on chain? Like, it costs me more to like do it on Lightning and then get it back and all of that kind of thing." So I currently just like only use Bitcoin, with the exception of like once a month I go to a Vienna meetup here and I pay my salad or my burger in Lightning. But like my vast majority of transactions, everything on chain. But I could imagine that like with point of sales and with like things like that, it probably is a different story, that where Lightning and like maybe eCash and like Arc and like many other things are already more popular.
Very much so. So Lightning is basically the standard for point of sale, and we are a Lightning first company. We can support on-chain payments, but it's something that we would do on a case-by-case basis. So if a merchant said, I don't know, I sell luxury cars, and maybe somebody's going to come in and buy a luxury car in one payment. That's not something that Lightning is really built for. It's difficult to route a transaction of that size across the network. And people aren't generally going to mind waiting for the transaction to confirm on chain and do a few confirmations back before driving off in the car. It's a slow sale, so that's not really a problem. But if you walk into an ice cream parlor and you buy an ice cream, it's a small amount of money. It's something you want to get the ice cream and eat it now. You don't want to be waiting for confirmations or anything like that. So Lightning simply makes sense. And I think the vast majority of retail situations, Lightning is the better way to do it. You mentioned about, it costs more to go into Lightning and then go out of it again afterwards. I would actually push back on that a little bit and say that's kind of an older way of thinking about it, because people talk about locking up your funds into a Lightning channel and then you have to unlock them later. I would consider freeing your sats by putting it into a Lightning channel, because they are now able to be spent on Lightning, and you don't need to close the channel again. At some point in the unknown future, you will, or you can and you will, but the Lightning channel remains open for an inordinately long period of time, and you simply keep reusing that. You receive money on it, you send money on it, and it's this free exchange, this free flow of your money, which wouldn't have been available for your funds which are on chain. If I only have on chain funds and I walk into that ice cream parlor, I'm probably not able to buy an ice cream using Bitcoin. Whereas if I have funds in my Lightning channel, I can. So I consider it more of freeing it rather than locking it up.
Interesting. I like it. Yeah, it's for me, it's the Bitcoin I get on Lightning, I keep on Lightning, and the Bitcoin I don't get on Lightning, I don't put on. Like, actually, I think I made that conversion, or like putting it there, like very rarely. Like think probably like 2 or 3 times, because I get some income also in Lightning, very, very rare, but it is just enough to cover my burger once a month. So I can keep it there, which is kind of interesting. Is Lightning actually at that point like as innovatable as Bitcoin? Like is that like is there any chance that like Lightning breaks and we need a new layer 2?
No. Lightning is already incredibly stable, incredibly robust enough that it's no longer a concern. Back in 2019, I went to the Lightning conference in Berlin. It was one of the very, very early Lightning conferences. And, we were buying things in Lightning. There was actually an ice cream vendor there, and it worked, but there were a lot of routing failures. There were a lot of problems. You try and make the payment, that's too much to route across the network, and you can't find a path and that kind of thing. That hasn't happened in a ridiculously long time. So if I could actually give you maybe a live demonstration, I have a Musqet terminal here. So this is one of our payment terminals. And as you can see, the front screen actually says pay with Bitcoin, pay with card. So you can select either. If you say pay with card, then it's a traditional Visa, MasterCard, Amex kind of payment. But I'm going to say pay with Bitcoin. I'll enter some token amount like 21p. This is set to British pounds, but of course, we can support euro as well. And as we expand around the world, other currencies. So I'm going to say it's 21p, confirm. And that goes away and it talks to my node and it generates a Lightning invoice from my node. If somebody would be so kind as to pay that, thank you, David.
Move it to your left a little, back and left a little bit, Ben. I've got it. A little bit. Stop that. That should get it. Move it closer a little bit. Oh, there, I've got it. Yeah. Okay. So I've got it here. This is on my wallet of Satoshi. I'm going to hit send right now. That's sending because that's gone through.
And you see, it's confirming here. And so the payment has been made. We can even, print a receipt. So exactly like any other payment terminal in the world, we have a receipt saying that 527 sats or 21p was paid. The current exchange rate is written there. A custom message, we are all Satoshi, that's just configured on my terminal. So you can see, it's a normal payment. And that is hopefully it's about as boring as any other payment. It's a very straightforward, very easy kind of thing to do. But what's important to note is those sats landed on my node. They didn't land, in some custodian. They didn't land with a middleman. Musqet never actually touched those funds. Musqet simply enabled the payment to go through from David's wallet, or wallet of Satoshi in this case, through to my node, which is set up on this device here.
That's freaking awesome. Like having it just like in self custody and having it. Because you talked about Node and we had it also before the recording. I just want to briefly touch, because people are so crazy about that topic currently on core versus nodes. How do you, I think we even talked on Twitter a little bit. I think it was you, when I first talked about it. How do you look currently at the core versus nodes debate? And yeah, what's your take on it?
So as a company, we are a Lightning first company, and therefore it doesn't actually affect us overly much at all. Just as a company, it's not something we need to, have a strong stand on and jump out there and say, we are doing this and, the other side is terrible, or whatever the case may be. My personal thoughts on it is that it's simply a relatively overblown issue. It's one of those things which, is being amplified by social media more than anything else. The consensus rules of Bitcoin have not changed and are not changing. OP return has always been allowed to be relatively large. There was no relay for it earlier under normal relay conditions, but there have been plenty of nodes out there which would relay it anyway. Bitcoin Core isn't the only node out there, even before NOTs came along. So there are other node implementations which would relay large OP returns, and it was always possible to push a large OP return to a miner directly. There's tools like Slipstream which let you give a transaction to the miner that runs that without ever broadcasting it to the network. It's from an information theory perspective, absolutely impossible to prevent arbitrary data being stored on Bitcoin. So I think providing an easier way and a cleaner way to do it that can then be pruned from the UTXO set is a good thing. I think it makes it less, there should be less spam on the network with better relay rules like Bitcoin Core 30 is actually bringing in. But overall, it's an overblown issue. It shouldn't have ever become such a big thing as it is. It's just one of these, social media arguments that became ridiculous.
I tend to agree. I even had I make a very small series on that, and the last guy was Mr. Engnom that I had on, and I asked him because he's on the not side, but he was on the not side way before the op return thing, and I asked him the specific question because I was curious about it. If core and knots were completely the same thing, and it just changed right now with the op return thing, would he also run knots? And he's like, no, I would stay with core. And it was kind of interesting to hear someone from the knot side saying like, I disliked core way before the op return, and I kind of think this op return thing is completely overblown, and I don't know why everyone is talking about it. And I'm like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense because it's a very emotional debate, and I'm like, why? And people were like screaming at me in the comment section that I make a video on it, and I'm like, oh, why? Why is it so? Like, you did not ask me about making videos about core issues before. And technical things haven't come to my comment section usually before. So why now?
Exactly. Yep.
Any thoughts on that, David?
No, I tend to defer to Ben's sage wisdom on that. I do. I think the easy knee-jerk reaction is to think, well, of course, spam is bad, so we should limit that, and then therefore not makes sense. But I do right now, if I'm completely honest, we've got far too many other pressing challenges in the business and matters to focus on. So as Ben said, if we had to take a position, I think we would have gone a lot deeper and really made some statements and made some decisions. I think we've got individual views, and I think I know there's a couple in the team that disagree with Ben's view, and that's fine. Right now that's what the world is about, right? Open debate and disagreement is something that I think we've seen of late is sorely needed. So we're okay for now. We don't need to take a position as it stands, but we would if we had to. But our focus remains very much on medium of exchange, building the best services for merchants that we can, and growing the business so that we have in 5 years a future where anyone can go into any merchant site, spend their Bitcoin, and as Ben said, it's rather uneventful and boring. But in doing so, we've achieved our objective.
I think maybe one thing that we can also pick on that is I personally, and I'm curious if Ben actually disagrees with that, I personally think it's the one really good thing from that is that people are aware that Bitcoin Core is not the only thing, that we actually can, that we have multiple implementation. And I know there's different arguments on that side, but I just like theoretically, and I was a software developer. I'm really not that deep into that. And so I know last time someone came to me like, oh, you're an expert in this Bitcoin Core thing, right? And I'm like, no, not at all. Like very, very far from that. So just like with that full disclaimer, but from my thing of like, if we only have one and it's like 99% of it, it's way easier for like a small, thing to kind of get in there and break something. But if we have like multiple implementations, maybe 2 or 3 or 4, like almost like political parties, it might be actually easier to say like, hey, if there's something breaking on one, we still have the other wing. How does that look of like, is it good that we have more than just one implementation, that like there's like multiple implementations that are kind of over whatever 5% of adoption?
So I think this is actually an interesting one because Satoshi himself actually said there shouldn't be more than one implementation because the risk is that the implementations will have different consensus rules, even by accident, and that will cause a chain fork, and then somebody's going to have to fix that and so on. I think perhaps while things were more volatile on the consensus rules in the early days, Satoshi was probably right. And I think now he wouldn't be right. I do think it makes sense to have multiple implementations. That risk does still exist, though. If I wrote a brand new Bitcoin implementation, which I have no plans on doing, but if I did, maybe I would get something wrong, and there would be a tiny issue in my consensus rule implementation compared to all of the other ones out there. And then mine considers a certain block to be valid, which others don't consider to be valid. And now all of a sudden I forked myself off the network. That is a risk. But I think it's a small enough risk now that there already are multiple competing implementations. There's not just Core and Knots. Those are by far the two most popular, well-known, loud names out there. But there are other implementations of the Bitcoin protocol, and they're running fine. They're routing transactions on the network. They're processing blocks. They're doing all of these things, and we're not seeing issues with it. So yes, I do think it's a good thing. It keeps the developers honest. It makes sure that people have the choice of running nodes that give them the rule sets that they consider to be appropriate or valid. So it's a good thing. It could be taken too far, but right now I don't think it is. I think it's okay and it's healthy.
That's awesome. And I guess the only downside to having 3 guests instead of 1 is I feel like we just got started and it's already been an hour. So that's I guess a little bit of a downside of that. I have one question to ask each and every one of my new guests on the podcast. Usually it's just one, but maybe I still ask today David and Adrian as Ben was already on. David, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
Gosh, I feel like that's better answered by other people, to be honest. What would we learn from me? I don't tend to consider myself an expert in anything. I think there's a need in the world to be open-minded and inquisitive and, be willing to have your opinions and your views changed. And I think, I try to take as much time considering what the right opinion is, or at least, and aligning that with my values. So I think, that's what we've done with Musqet. I started out thinking, how do we drive merchant adoption? And that's the one thing that we wanted to solve. But, to arrive at that point, we had to become fiat maximalist, payment operators. We had to become the best. So, achieving what you want to do in life and other things can sometimes take you down a path you didn't quite expect. And I think where we are, if I just reflect on the journey, I'm not sure whether this is the intention of the question or not, but I would say there's 2 things. There's resilience and a refusal to stop. And I think where we are right now, there's many times on the Musqet journey over the last 2 or 3 years that it's been too hard. It has just been too difficult to build what we needed to build, to attract the right investment that we needed to bring the talent like Ben and Adrian and others. I mean, we've got a real growing team of about 20 people now. There have been times when it's been too difficult. And I think having that center of gravity, that knowledge that actually, would you put the rest of your career on the line for Bitcoin or whatever it is that you're doing? How important is this to you? So I think having that sort of behind in my mind at all times has sort of given me that resilience to continue and to say, yeah, look, this is hard. This is very difficult, but I think it's worth it. And I think it's worth it for all of these reasons, and a lot of which we've discussed on the podcast. So, I know this isn't a life coaching session, but if there's anyone out there that is building a business or finding anything in general, whether they're training for a marathon, whatever it is they're doing hard, just make sure you know why you're doing it. And if you've got a real purpose, then just keep going. Just don't stop, because if you don't stop, you're probably going to win.
I love that. And for Adrian, I will adopt the question a little bit to make it more interesting. What would you advise to all the Bitcoiners out there that are like me, 100% in it and like completely obsessed with it all my life?
Well, I think obsession is useful. It powers change. I think if you're not waking up in the morning and thinking, how do I get where I want to be? How do I pursue the thing that I love? You're probably going to have a very boring life, and you know, that's okay. That's a choice people make. So stick to the obsession, but do accept. And we've already touched on this. There is an irony about championing change. The moment you achieve your goal, it does become rather dull. Everyone uses it, and you know, you'll be saying, because you're young enough to do this, you'll be saying in 50 years' time, but I was the one who said we should be using it. And everyone will go, yeah, well, that's okay, Robin, well done. Embrace that possibility, because it's a lovely thought. But I think without obsession, without that passion, very little of worth gets done. And if you look back at the early day, even going to the early days of the Industrial Revolution, you know, the pioneers of steam engines were as passionate about what they had come across and what they were inventing and refining and improving as Bitcoiners are about Bitcoin today. And look what the steam engine revolution did to the world. It created global wealth that has spread and lifted everybody up. So I would stick at it, please, Robin, for the sake of my children. Not for me, probably, but definitely for the sake of my children. Do carry on being obsessive.
I will definitely keep doing that. I have one question, always at the end of the podcast, the end routine, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. It's a little bit of a difficult one because I think, is there any one of you three not married?
I'm not married.
And because the previous guest asked the question of like, would you marry someone who thinks Bitcoin is a scam?
No.
Tricky one.
No, not because it's Bitcoin, but because that kind of closed-minded thinking would annoy me. You know, do your own thinking. Don't just pick up on the boring, you know, easy dinner party talk about things and just accept these statements as true. It isn't a scam. It clearly isn't a scam. And anyone who thought that, I would think, you know, don't want to spend my life with someone who hasn't bothered to do their own homework.
Awesome. Then, yeah, thank you so much. I think it was a lovely podcast. The first time actually with 3 guests. I just realized that we had sometimes 2 guests on, but now 3 times. Before letting you all go, maybe for David, where can people find Musqet and where can the people find all the people here?
Yeah, we're very findable on X. So at Musqet_Bitcoin is our corporate or company handle. Ben is Ben DeWall. If you just type Ben DeWall in, he's easy to find. I'm on Musqet_David. Adrian, we protect from social media. So if you've got any questions from the crowd for Adrian, then feel free to send them through to me, and we'll send a response at some point.
Really cool. Thank you so much, Ben, Adrian, and David for being on. And also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.